Hello, everyone. This is Laura Womack, and I'm from Never Too Late Cafe. And I'm with the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast today, and I have a special guest, a relative, disclaimer, Lee Pennington. And I'm going to have him give a little bit of information about himself and tell us where he currently lives.
Thanks, Laura. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, in the east end of the county, Jefferson County. All of the county now has been incorporated into the city of Louisville. So legitimately, we're now the 16th largest city in the country. So, but I live in a little burg called Middletown. And so if you send me a letter, you can either put it Middletown or Louisville, and either one of them will get to me. I've been here since 1967. My college roommate, Steve Alexander, who's now in Brazil, tells me if I stay here much longer, they'll name a street after me. So I've been here a little while.
So tell me about your house. It has a name.
Yeah, this is it's called Kratz House, Kratz. Kratz means scratch in German. The land was at one time a Revolutionary War land grant, and there were 1,200 acres given to the person who owned it at the time. The house was built, it started in 1848, was finished sometime in the 1850s, and everybody who's gotten the house has built something onto it. So it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. But at one time, it was in the 1850s, it was a tavern. I call it a poor man's tavern. There is a richer man's tavern up on Old Main Street of Middletown. But this is where the guys came through. They wouldn't have a lot of money. They would stay here. They probably only had one bed in the original tavern. So if you spent the night, it would be the luck of the draw who you were sleeping with. If only two people showed up, it'd be two. If it were four, then there'd be four people probably in the same bed. They did things a little bit different back in the older days than we do now. Now, if you don't have a private room and a private bath, you can't sleep very well. So different world. But the person had 1,200 acres here, and they raised grapes and made wine. They were famous for their wine at the time. But that goes back a lot of years.
Wow. And very interesting. I didn't know the history of it. I know several people that live in neighborhoods where the house has been there a long time, and it will have the name of the original people that built it. So that's what I kind of thought. Yeah, well, Kratz was certainly, if they weren't the original ones, which they were not, they may have been part of the family that the relatives of the person who got the Revolutionary War land grant, but Kratz was not the original name of the owner, but maybe descendants. But there is a street right off of Lilac Way, which the house is placed on, called Kratz. So it's the family was pretty prominent back in the day, I'm sure. Because they had a street named after them.
Yeah.
Like you may someday.
Well, if I live here long enough. I think that was my roommate telling me I'd been here too long.
Your form of art, you have many, but let's start with being an author. So you have 23 books?
I do. I just had my 24th book accepted at the end of August. So it'll be coming out, a novel called Moment of the Butterfly. And that'll be my 24th published book. I have written several more than that, but that's the amount that's been accepted and published. Or this one's in the process of being published. I've been a writer as long as I can remember. The first writing I ever remember doing occurred back when I was in fourth grade. at the little one-room school on White Oak, where I grew up in the western end of Greenup County. And we had it wasn't a history book, it was a novel, but it was a historical novel about a family of settlers, European settlers coming to this continent back in after Jamestown, and the novel was about several generations of this family called the Farnham family. And I remember the novel ended at the end of the 1800s, but I lived in the 1900s, and I was kind of upset that the generations didn't continue. And so the first writing I ever remember doing was creating 2 more generations for that novel. And I remember it was about 80 some handwritten pages on big long yellow tablet that we had. And I wrote about 2 more generations, bringing that family into the 20th century. I don't know whatever happened to that piece of writing, but I do remember it well.
4th grade. Wow. So you've self-published some as well. Is that correct?
Say again?
You've self-published as well?
No, I never did self-publish.
Oh, okay.
All of my publications have been accepted. An awful lot of them have been by small presses, but back in the 60s, especially for poets, the small presses were the places that one could get published, and I had an awful lot, number-wise, an awful lot of poems published in literally hundreds of small press magazines. I've been published certainly in large magazines, but the heyday of the small presses were the 1960s. At one time, there were probably over 1,000 magazines. They were called small, not because of their size, but because their publication subscriptions. They would, many of them would have subscriptions under 1,000 subscribers, but all the poets, all the major poets in America that I know, they were competing to be in those small presses along with everybody else. So people like Robert Frost and Carl Sandburg and Edna St. Vincent Millay and all those people published in what would be considered small presses. But at one time, all the major publishing houses in America felt a compulsion to have a poet in their house. That's no longer true. You'll have many large presses now that don't publish any poets at all. But I have nothing against self-publishing. Many poets had to do that, including people like Walt Whitman, one of America's greatest poets. He published his own first book, and he would walk along and people would throw it out on his head. That's a heck of a response. I've been shot at, but I've never had a book of my poetry thrown out on my head. So I'm missing that.
So you write poetry, and your novels, are they a lot of historic novels as well?
Well, I wouldn't say they're historical. Some of the stuff I do a lot of historical work. I'm president of the Ancient Kentucky Historical Association and have published a lot of articles on on historical, archaeological kinds of stuff. No, my novel is I would call it a very literary novel. And, since I'm a poet, it's obviously going to be filled with nuances and symbolism and things that you might not ordinarily find in just a straight prose kind of novel. But I have published, my first book was not a book of poetry, it was a critical work on the novels of Jesse Stewart called The Dark Hills of Jesse Stewart, a study of symbolism and vision in the works of Jesse Stewart. And I took Jesse's first book of poetry, which, by the way, was a self-published book of poetry most people don't even know about. Most people think in terms of Man with a Bull-Tongue Plow being Jesse's first book, and that came out in 1934. But Jesse published his own book, first book of poetry, called Harvest of Youth, 4 years earlier in 1930. And when Jesse found out people looked down on self-publishing back in those days, Jesse got all the copies he had left of the book and burned them. And so that's a very rare book, valued in excess of $10,000 per copy. You can find one now. But I took that book and studied the way Jesse put his symbolism and things together, and then traced that through the publication of his novels, through Jesse's novel, Daughter of the Legend. I started with Jesse's first novel, Trees of Heaven, and traced it from there all the way through Daughter of the Legend.
I can't remember did you co-write with Jesse, or he was an instructor?
Jesse was my principal at McHale High School. My junior year, Jesse, after his major heart attack in 1954, 3 years later, Jesse came back and became principal at McHale. I couldn't believe that happened. Jesse couldn't get teachers, and so he took students with good grades. Well, I would say the students with the top grades, and he made teachers out of them. So my junior year, I taught seventh grade. The first semester, the whole semester, I didn't go to a single one of my classes. My junior year, in the first semester, I was teaching. So I studied at night and took tests after school. The teachers let me take the test or, write whatever I needed to write. Now, my second semester, Jesse was able to get teachers and fill all the spots, but he was missing about half a dozen or so teachers when he came into McHale. And rather than close the school down, he had students with good grades teach lower grades, and there were about 6 of us, as I remember, that he pulled out of class and had him do that. So I was a teacher when I was a junior in high school.
So interesting. I couldn't remember I couldn't remember the relationship there, but
well, Jesse, I'm related to Jesse bloodline. Jesse's grandmother, Violet Pennington, was the sister of James, my great-great-grandfather. So I don't know what
I have to think about that.
Don't think too long. As Jesse said,
distant relative.
As Jesse said, don't think too hard; it'll hurt your mind.
Yeah. I don't know why that lineage sort of stuff. It's confusing. I'd have to write it down on paper and then ask someone what they thought. And so, documentaries. You have done how many documentaries?
26 to date.
Okay.
Did my first one in 1990. At the time was married to my late wife, Joy, whom I was married to for 49 years before she died. And Joy and I went to Papua New Guinea with a little 8mm video camera and went back into the jungles and did a piece called In Search of the Mudmen. And that was our first. And it was something all my life I had been wanting to try to do, was to do documentaries. And so this turned out I went and did that. That documentary just a week ago screened at the University of Louisville, and I'm still amazed at what was able to capture on film. Most of it is now historic record because it's all, Papua New Guinea has changed incredibly since 1990. When Joy and I went there to do the film, and we went into the highlands, tribes in the highlands had never seen a blonde-haired girl, and they were just absolutely fascinated with Joy. They couldn't believe her hair. They couldn't believe her skin, and the kids would come and pull her arms and run their hands through her hair. So we stepped back into the Stone Age, and I got to film the Wig Man, which is a ritual that the males go through with the Wig Man teacher. They go with him 18 months and grow this elaborate wig, their own hair, and then it's tied and cut, and then it's an enormous wig that they decorate. And it's those wigs, if a tourist gets hold of them, they'll pay $1,000 just to get one of them. They're pieces of art. And during that 18 months, the young men learn all they need to know about how to live and survive in their own culture. And it's the male schooling. I went to a little one-room school. They go to the Wig Man. It's a maturation process, and it's a beautiful ritual. But anyway, I got that on film 2 years before National Geographic got in to film it. So I felt kind of nice about that.
So that was the beginning of you doing other documentaries,
yes,
different places around the world.
Oh, yeah, I've done documentaries all over.
Join us next week as we pick up part 2 of our conversation with Lee.